They called me a fat pig at my own son's wedding. His new wife said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. The room froze for a second, then laughter spilled like broken glass. I smiled, pretending it didn't cut, pretending I didn't feel every eye slice through me. But when her father turned to look at me, his face changed. The color drained from it. He stumbled over his words and whispered, "Wait. Aren't you my new boss?" In that moment, the laughter died. The air went still, and I realized something powerful. Sometimes the people who humiliate you are already standing on the ground you built beneath them. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening, or tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Eva Dean March, and what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about family, pride, and revenge. If you've ever been laughed at, if you've ever swallowed your pain just to keep the peace, this story is for you. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell here reminds us that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. The music at Willow Crest Winery sounded like something from another world. Violins under chandeliers, champagne flutes chiming against polished crystal. I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible by choice. That had always been my power. At 58, I'd learned that silence disarms arrogance better than any sharp word could. I wore a simple navy dress, the same one I'd bought on clearance 3 years ago, and my mother's old pearl necklace. The dress wasn't meant to impress, it was camouflage, because people never question the woman who looks exactly how they expect her to look: ordinary, harmless, forgettable. The ceremony had been beautiful. Calder looked radiant, and for a brief moment I thought maybe this day would be different. But as the sun began to fall over the vineyard and guests gathered for dinner, I saw the first crack form. Sloane, my son's new wife, approached her designer gown, gleaming like frost. "Mom," she said sweetly, looping her arm through mine, "come meet my parents." Her voice had that tone polite women use when they're about to throw someone to the wolves. We walked toward the long family table where her parents, Grant and Margot Whitfield, sat surrounded by friends. The air shimmered with laughter, all expensive wine and expensive confidence. Sloane gestured at me like I was an exhibit at a charity auction. "This," she said with a syrupy smile, "is the fat pig we have to put up with." For a moment, I thought I misheard. Then the table erupted in laughter, sharp, nervous, cruel. My pulse thudded in my ears. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't flinch. I'd trained for years to let arrogance destroy itself. I simply smiled as if it were all a harmless joke. And then silence. A long, awkward, suffocating silence. Grant Whitfield had turned in his seat, his glass frozen halfway to his lips, his face drained of color. "Wait," he muttered, blinking hard. "Wait. Aren't you my new boss?" The laughter died instantly. Even the string quartet faltered bows, hovering in midair. Margot's manicured hand froze around her wine glass. I met Grant's eyes, calm and steady, and saw recognition bloom into panic. He tried to recover, stammering something about mistaken identity, but the damage was done. Everyone at that table now knew the power had shifted, and none of them could laugh anymore. I didn't need to say much. I simply placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Excuse me?" I murmured. "I think I've had enough excitement for one evening." I walked away as whispers rippled behind me, leaving them to piece together what I had deliberately left unsaid. As I reached the vineyard gate, I caught one last glimpse of Calder. He was standing near the dance floor, confusion shadowing his face as he watched me go. I almost turned back, but no, not yet. Some truths need to ripen before you harvest them. On my way to the car, the event manager rushed up to confirm the floral invoice, apologizing that it had exceeded the budget. Margot had waved off the concern earlier, but now I noticed her credit card still resting on the counter, transaction pending. Small details, but telling ones. The kind of details that spoke of fragile wealth behind glittering facades. When I drove away from Willowcrest, the sun had set, completely leaving the vineyard washed in silver and shadow. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. They saw humiliation. What I saw was information leverage timing exposure. Imitating invisibility had never been weakness. It was strategy. Because when people stop seeing you, they stop guarding themselves. And that's when you start to see everything. That night, as headlights cut through the winding road toward Bend, I knew one thing for certain: silence could be a move too, especially when someone else had just torn off their own mask. The next morning, my apartment in Bend smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, falling across a sea of folders spread over my kitchen table, 15 years of balance sheets, trust deeds, and brokerage statements. I hadn't planned to revisit any of this so soon, but after last night pretending wasn't enough anymore. I needed to remind myself exactly what I had built and why. Back in 2012, Harlan and I sold our energy management patent to a California tech firm. We thought we'd walk away with enough to live comfortably. $25 million sounded like a dream for two engineers who'd spent decades saving grocery coupons and working double shifts. But we didn't retire. We studied. We learned the market like a new language patient, analytical, relentless. By 2015, we doubled our money through cautious investing, blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, slow but steady growth. Then Harlan wanted more. He believed the real returns lived in innovation, not preservation. So we moved into growth tech, medical research, clean energy startups. By 2018, our portfolio topped $200 million. By 2020, just before Harlan's heart gave out, it had climbed beyond $700. After he passed, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Grief, when paired with discipline, can turn into something dangerous. Focus sharpened to a blade. That's when I created Northlake Capital, a shell company that allowed me to buy assets discreetly. It was through Northlake that I acquired Whitfield Industrial Systems. 3 years ago, a struggling but well-built manufacturing firm, drowning in its founders' bad loans. I saw potential where others saw collapse. So I saved it, restructured it, and quietly kept Grant Whitfield on as a consultant. I paid him well enough to keep his family afloat, but never enough to make him suspect. Last night, that irony unfolded under the chandeliers of Willowcrest. The man whose daughter mocked me lived off the company I owned. They'd called me a family embarrassment, unaware that their elegance was paid for by my discretion. I kept all of it from Calder, from the beginning. When the patent sold, I told him we'd made a nice profit. I wanted him to live on effort, not inheritance. He'd always been driven like Harlan, and I couldn't bear the thought of him becoming one of those trust fund men who confuse comfort for character. He believed I lived on an engineer's pension and my late husband's insurance. He never asked more, and I never offered. But as I sifted through the papers that morning, I felt the weight of my own lies. Protecting him had cost me honesty. Maybe I thought secrecy would shield him from greed. Maybe it was just my way of controlling what I couldn't control anymore: life, death, love. The phone buzzed. A message from Sloan. Lunch today, Seattle. There are some things Calder and I would like to discuss. Attached was a link to a 3-year-old article. Northlake Capital acquires WS. Buyer remains anonymous. The image was grainy but clear enough to show the outline of a woman in a navy dress sitting quietly behind a row of lawyers. I stared at it for a long time, coffee going cold in my hands. So she'd found the trail. Or maybe her father had told her just enough to make her dangerous. Either way, the clock had started. I closed the laptop and gathered the papers back into their folders. When I bought WIS, it was business. Now, it was personal. Before leaving the apartment, I caught my reflection in the window hair silvering at the temple's eyes that had learned to calculate risk better than any algorithm. People like Sloan thought power was loud, but real power. It's quiet. It watches. It waits. That afternoon, I packed a small bag and drove north toward Seattle. The road curved between pine and mountain sky, pale with distance. Somewhere out there, my son's new wife was preparing to challenge me, thinking she could measure my worth by what she thought she could take. Let her try. She had no idea that every game she was about to play had been designed years ago by the woman she called a fat pig. The day after the wedding, Sloan invited us to lunch at Canlis, a restaurant where even the air felt expensive. When Calder told me I already knew what this was, she wasn't looking for a pleasant family meal. She was staging a presentation. When I arrived, she was already seated by the window overlooking Lake Union, a Bordeaux, decanting on the table. Her blazer was pressed to perfection, and her phone lay face down but never out of reach. She'd come 30 minutes early to control the space, just like people do when they're about to spring something calculated. Evadine Calder, she greeted, standing with that rehearsed warmth that always sounded one note short of genuine. I thought we should all talk now that we're officially family. Her eyes flickered to the waiter as he poured the wine. I could see the flash of her email screen reflected in the glass Redwood investigations. It disappeared when she locked the phone, but not before I noticed it. She pushed the article across the table before the first sip was poured. It was the same one she'd sent me earlier. North Lake Capital acquires WS. Buyer remains anonymous. Her manicured finger tapped the image. Funny, isn't it? How these anonymous investors always turn out to be someone unexpected. This woman doesn't. She reminds you of someone. The photo showed me 3 years ago in that same navy dress, half hidden behind attorneys. I smiled faintly. I wouldn't know, I said. I'm more interested in the structure of the acquisition itself. Have you ever studied SPVs? She blinked, caught off guard. SPVs, special purpose vehicles? I said softly. They're designed for privacy, for efficiency. I let the words hang, the kind that sound harmless but promise edges. Calder shifted uneasily. Mom, is there something you haven't told me? I met his eyes. Plenty, sweetheart. I've hidden many things, but only so you could grow into the kind of man who didn't need them. Sloan leaned in, eyes bright with challenge. That's not fair to Calder. Families should be transparent. We were thinking about establishing a joint trust, a family fund for the future, something that ensures the next generation can thrive together. I let her talk. She liked to fill silence with her own certainty. I knew that type, the ones who believed eloquence was control. As she spoke about long-term sustainability and intergenerational governance, I studied the tiny notes scribbled in her leather planner. The corner of one page read QB LLP, Quinn and Braxter, a law firm specializing in family asset disputes. When the waiter brought the bill, she reached for it before Calder could. Allow me, she said proudly, signing the receipt with a flourish. The machine beeped twice. Transaction requires verification, it blinked. Her smile tightened, but she didn't say a word. She had done her homework. I could almost respect that. But knowledge without context is dangerous. It gives people the illusion of power they don't actually understand. I finished my wine and said evenly, Sloan, I admire your ambition. You remind me of someone who once thought control meant safety. It doesn't. I stood adjusting my coat. But if you insist on playing with money, you should know what it costs to lose it. Calder frowned. Mom, what's going on? I kissed his cheek lightly. We'll talk soon. Then I looked at Sloan, who was pretending to scroll through her phone again. For a fraction of a second, I saw the screen flash an open tab titled Redwood Progress Report. I smiled. Enjoy your lunch. Outside, Seattle's summer air was crisp and metallic. I called Arthur Kincaid from the parking lot. Start looking into the Whitfield family's finances, I said. Every line of credit, every consulting contract, every investigation with my name attached. I want it all. He hesitated. Is this about the daughter-in-law? It's about strategy, I replied. They want to use the law fine. I've been playing by those rules longer than they've been breathing. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the car window, calm, controlled, still invisible, but never small. If they want to make me their target, I murmured, I'll show them what it means to hunt. 2 days later, I sat across from Arthur in his office downtown while the rain pressed softly against the glass. He had that look he always got before delivering bad news, pity mixed with reluctant admiration. "Evadine," he said, sliding a stack of reports across the desk. "You're not going to like this." The first page was a summary of the Whitfield family's holdings. Their estate was mortgaged for 78% of its value. Grant's company debts totaled over $9 million in commercial loans. Margot had been withdrawing consistent sums from their investment accounts just to maintain their lifestyle. And Grant's consulting income, $40,000 a month, came directly from WIS. From me. Arthur sighed. In simple terms, they're living on your payroll without realizing it. I stared at the numbers, feeling neither surprise nor satisfaction, just confirmation. The same family that mocked me was being held up by the hands they tried to slap away. "There's more," Arthur continued. "Sloan opened 3 new credit lines in the past 2 months, likely to fund her little research projects." I leaned back. "Find out who she's been paying." He nodded and began typing. Within minutes, the printer whirred to life. Redwood investigations, he read aloud. But interestingly, the account that paid them wasn't hers. He turned the page toward me. It was Margot's. "Of course," I murmured. "Mother and daughter hand in hand." Arthur frowned. "There's also this." He opened a folder labeled Private, SEC Contacts. It seems Sloan has already reached out to the Securities and Exchange Commission. She's implying possible non-disclosure violations, anonymous shell companies, insider transactions. If she files a formal complaint, it could force them to unmask the beneficial owner behind Northlake Capital. 15 years of deliberate privacy could vanish overnight. Arthur's tone softened. "You built this structure to protect yourself and Calder. But if they dig deep enough, they'll connect you to everything from the trusts to WIS. It's airtight legally, but perception is what ruins people. I finished for him." He nodded. "Exactly." I looked down at the papers. Contracts, withdrawals, fake confidence printed in black and white. "If they think they can weaponize the law against me," I said quietly, "they've forgotten who taught them how the law works." Arthur watched me cautious. "What do you want me to do?" "Prepare a counter," I said. "Full control provisions. I want the option to buy out Grant's consulting contract immediately. If they file anything, they lose their income source before the ink dries." He arched an eyebrow. "You're planning to cut them off completely." "No," I said, gathering the files. "I'm planning to remind them where their oxygen comes from." When I stood to leave, the rain had thickened into a steady downpour, Seattle gray and pulsing outside. I paused at the door. "Arthur, one more thing. Check every transfer from the Whitfield estate over the last 6 months. Look for anything routed through legal intermediaries." He nodded, already typing again. "I'll send you everything by tonight." In the car, I placed the folders on the passenger seat. My hands didn't shake. They hadn't in years. I pressed record on my phone and spoke into the quiet. If they want to turn me into their target, I'll teach them what a real strategist looks like. A message from Arthur came just as I started the engine. They're meeting with Quinn and Braxter tomorrow night. Whitfield residence, so it was official. The family that had laughed at me under crystal chandeliers was now plotting under their own roof, convinced they were hunters. I smiled to myself, the first real smile in days. "Let them plan," I said aloud. "I've already written the ending." Then I drove toward home, headlights cutting through the rain, the city lights reflected on the windshield, like a chessboard waiting for my next move. 3 days after the meeting with Arthur, I set the stage. My apartment in Bend had never looked so deliberately ordinary. Soft lighting, a modest cheese platter, 2 bottles of mid-range wine. I wanted the atmosphere to feel safe, casual, unthreatening. People reveal more when they think they're in control. Sloan arrived first, dressed like she was leading a board meeting rather than visiting her mother-in-law. Calder followed behind, already uneasy. I could see it in his shoulders, the tension of a man trapped between 2 loyalties. "Thank you for having us," Sloane said, flashing a polite smile as she opened her laptop. "I've been working on something I think will benefit everyone." She projected a document onto the TV screen, clean fonts, subtle colors, the confidence of someone who believed the aesthetics of professionalism could replace the substance of it. The title read, "March Whitfield Family Foundation, Strategic Legacy Planning. I want to create a family foundation," she began, "an investment-based charitable entity. Starting capital, $50 million. The board would include you, me, and Calder. Equal votes, equal oversight. It would bring transparency and protect the family's assets for the next generation." I studied her carefully. "And who wrote this charter? A lawyer, I know," she said smoothly. "Someone at Quinn and Braxter." I tilted my head, of course. Calder cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, I think it's a good idea. It's about uniting the family, not dividing it." I rose without a word, opened the side cabinet, and pulled out a folder Arthur had prepared for me. I set it on the coffee table and began laying the documents one by one. "You know what's fascinating, Sloane?" I said lightly. "Your family owes me more than any of you seem to realize, and yet here you are, proposing to manage the wealth I created." Her voice sharpened. "You've been spying on me." "No," I said, my tone calm but cold. "I'm simply doing what you've been doing to me." Calder turned to his wife, face pale. "Sloane, did you really hire private investigators?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the laptop. "I just wanted transparency, that's all." I slid an invoice across the table. "Redwood Investigations 2 weeks before the wedding, paid through Margot's account. And here are your 3 new credit lines. High interest, unsecured, all opened under the assumption you'd have significant family assets soon." Sloane tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. "Please, I'm not done. Here's a transcript of your call with Margot discussing a contact at Quinn and Braxter about potential SEC inquiries. You claim to want transparency, but you were preparing a legal ambush." Calder's expression collapsed from disbelief to quiet horror. "You planned all this," he whispered to his wife. She tried to recover her composure. "I was trying to protect what's ours." "Ours?" I asked softly. "What exactly belongs to you, Sloane? The house your parents mortgaged, the consultancy income your father earns because I chose to keep him employed. You've built your castle on land you don't own." Calder looked between us, torn apart. "Mom, stop." "Sloane, please, this isn't helping." I turned to him gently. "You'll have to choose soon, Calder, but not between me and her. Between truth and the story she's selling you." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Calder picked up one of the papers and frowned. It was a consulting agreement, Grant's signature beside mine. He turned to Sloane. "You said my father-in-law's company was independent. You lied." Sloane's mask cracked. "I didn't lie, I simplified." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I caught a glimpse of the sender, Marla Quinn. I knew then what she'd done. "You sent it?" I said quietly. She looked up sharply. "What are you talking about? You sent the corporate summary to the SEC." I leaned back, almost pitying her. "The complaint's already filed, isn't it?" Her silence was confirmation enough. At that exact moment, my own phone vibrated. A message from Arthur SEC officially acknowledged the complaint this morning. I exhaled slowly. So it had begun. I stood collecting the documents. "Thank you, Sloane. You've reminded me of something I forgot, that silence isn't safety, it's surrender. If I want peace, I'll have to speak first." I turned toward the window, watching the reflection of my son's broken expression. "And when this is over," I said softly, "I hope you remember which one of us was honest." That night, long after they'd left, I sat alone with the empty glasses still on the table. The wine had gone flat, the cheese untouched. I thought of all the years I'd mistaken wealth for security. But in the hands of the wrong person, money wasn't protection, it was a map. Straight back to you. A week later, Seattle was all gray mist and static. Arthur called me to his office early. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from too many late-night phone calls with too many lawyers. They've opened a file, he said. The SEC has officially begun reviewing Northlake Capital and its subsidiaries. I asked, do they have evidence? Not much, he admitted. But it doesn't take evidence, Evadine, just suspicion. Once your name is in their system, it'll ripple through every holding you've got. He slid a printed copy of the initial summary across the desk. 12 shell companies alleged insider activity, unverified trading patterns. It was meticulous and familiar. The writing style, I said quietly, belongs to Marla Quinn. Arthur nodded. She's good. She framed it as a public interest concern. Even if it's dismissed, the investigation could drag for months. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Grant. His voice was shaky. I didn't know they were going to do this. Sloan and Margot went behind my back. If this blows up, I'll be dragged down with them. I looked out the window at the drizzle streaking the glass. Then stop lying, I said. Tell the truth before it buries you. Later that afternoon, Calder showed up unannounced. He looked older, like the last week had aged him years. Mom, he said quietly. Sloan moved out. She's at a hotel downtown. She says she needs to protect family assets. Which family, I asked. He didn't answer. He just sank into the chair across from me, his eyes full of disbelief and exhaustion. I wanted to reach across the table to remind him that love doesn't always mean loyalty, but he was learning that himself now. Arthur called again that evening. The financial press caught wind of it. Tomorrow's paper is running a headline, Mystery Female Investor Under Investigation. They don't name you, but it's obvious. I felt a sharp pang, not fear, but something colder. Exposure. 15 years of careful anonymity undone by a woman who thought she could weaponize suspicion. The next day, Calder was suspended from work pending review. His company didn't want the risk of association. Snow drifted softly past the tall windows of the Mount Rainier Lodge when I stepped into the private conference room. The air smelled of cedar and cold stone, perfect for endings. Everyone was already there. Sloan, her parents, their lawyer, Marla Quinn, Calder, sitting stiff beside them, and Arthur at my side, like quiet steel. I had chosen this place because distance has a way of stripping people of their illusions. I began calmly, my voice carrying through the heavy silence. We're here to discuss this within ethical boundaries, I said. If you cross those, the conversation ends. Marla straightened her papers. Our clients simply seek fairness. Given the family connections and the financial assets in question, we propose a $15 million family trust, co-managed by Mrs. March, her son, and Mrs. Whitfield. Equal voting rights, transparency, and stability for future generations. Arthur leaned back, eyes cool. And what you're calling transparency, he said, comes from evidence provided to the SEC by your side. Evidence that was fabricated. Marla's jaw tensed. Sloan crossed her legs and smiled thinly. If there's nothing to hide, she said, why fear transparency? I met her gaze, because transparency means different things depending on who's holding the flashlight. I waited, let the silence drag. They thought I was cornered, that I'd trade compliance for calm. I reached into my briefcase and laid down the stack of files Arthur had prepared. Let's make things simple, I said. Here are your receipts. Arthur flipped open the first folder. It was Grant's consultancy contract, his signature clear under my own. Mr. Whitfield. Arthur said evenly, this confirms that for the past 3 years, your primary income has come directly from the company Mrs. March owns. You've been compensated by the person your family is accusing of misconduct. Grant's face went pale. Margot reached for his arm. No one spoke. I opened another file, sliding out printed emails between Margot and Sloan. This one, I said softly, is my favorite. The part where you discuss leaking stories to financial outlets to pressure me into revealing my identity. Clever. Desperate, but clever. Sloan's eyes flashed. You had no right to what? I interrupted. To protect myself from the people trying to destroy me, I only mirrored what you were already doing. Calder turned toward his wife, voice breaking. Sloan, did you hire investigators? Did you lie to me? She hesitated, her face shifting from confidence to something brittle. I just wanted clarity, she said, for our future. He shook his head. Our future built on what my mother's money. Arthur placed the final document on the table, a notice of intent to revoke Grant's consultancy contract and freeze Whitfield Industrial's payments if the complaint wasn't withdrawn. The air in the room thinned. I looked directly at Sloan. You called me a fat pig before you knew whose hand was feeding your family. You've played every card except honesty. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I stood and spoke clearly. Here's my offer. Withdraw the SEC complaint. Cease all contact with me and Calder. I'll transfer $5 million to a private account of your choosing within 72 hours. In return, your parents keep their house. Grant keeps his job. After that, disappear permanently. The room went silent except for the muffled hum of the heating vents. Marla's pen scratched across a notepad as she calculated the risk, her eyes darting to Sloan. $5 million was a clean exit, a way to leave with pride instead of ruin. Calder looked between us, his voice quiet but trembling. If she takes it, I'll know everything I need to know. I nodded toward Sloan. You have 72 hours. Choose silence or choose destruction. But understand this, I don't lose twice. I gathered my things, leaving the files on the table like gravestones. Outside, snowflakes landed on my coat, melting before they could settle. Arthur walked beside me in silence until we reached the elevator. She'll take it, he said finally. She always wanted money, not truth. I stared out the glass as the elevator doors closed. Then she'll teach Calder something I couldn't, I whispered. The price of greed. When we reached the lobby, I took a long breath. I didn't feel triumphant, only emptied as if I'd just paid a ransom for peace. Sometimes I murmured, you buy silence, not because it's fair, but because it's the only language some people understand. By the time I reached Seattle that night, the snow had turned to rain. I gave her 72 hours, but deep down I knew she wouldn't need that long. Greed always moves faster than time. 48 hours later, Arthur called while I was watching the rain slide down my kitchen window. His tone was steady but lighter than usual. It's done, he said. Marla confirmed the agreement. Sloan accepted the offer. The funds were transferred this morning. I closed my eyes for a moment. Did she sign the non-contact clause? She did, he replied. $5 million buys a lot of quiet. I signed the final authorization and slid an envelope across my desk addressed to her. This is the price of silence. Don't return it and don't return here. Calder filed for divorce that same week. The stated reason was simple, irreconcilable values. He came by to tell me in person. His voice was steady, but his eyes were tired. She wanted power, Mom. You wanted peace. I was caught in between and almost lost both. I touched his hand. You didn't lose me. A month later, an email from Grant arrived. Thank you for letting me keep my position. I didn't know how to stop them. I didn't respond. Mercy doesn't need acknowledgement. When I sold my apartment in Bend, I chose Sedona, a place where the earth itself looked alive, red and glowing under the desert sun. I bought a small adobe house on the edge of town, far from investors and gossip. The first morning there, I woke to birdsong instead of phone alerts. For the first time in years, I felt what quiet really meant. Arthur visited once before the move. You're really walking away, he said. I'm not walking away, I replied. I'm choosing which noise I let in. Months passed. Then Calder called again. He sounded different, lighter. I met someone, he said. Her name's Aria. She teaches first grade. She doesn't care what I own, just what I do. Then you've already won, I told him. He paused. She said, Your mother must be a wise woman. I laughed softly. She gives me too much credit. Later that evening, Arthur forwarded me an email from Margot. You won. Thank you for not destroying us. I read it once, then deleted it. Some things deserve to vanish quietly. Another message came from a young engineer, a scholarship recipient from the Harlan Fund. Because of you, I'm not hauling freight anymore. I'm building batteries. I printed that one and kept it. Harlan would have liked him. 6 months after the settlement, I saw Grant at a technical conference in Phoenix. He looked smaller, somehow thinner around the edges. When our eyes met across the lobby, he nodded once. I nodded back. That was enough. One morning in Sedona, I passed through a local market and stopped at a stall selling small stone carvings. There, among owls and coyotes, was a tiny figurine of a pig, round, polished, unassuming. I bought it without hesitation and set it on my desk beside my laptop. They once called me a fat pig to humiliate me. Now it sits as a reminder that the creature they mocked survived every one of them. Pigs are clever, patient. They wait until everyone else has feasted, then take what's left and make it last through the winter. A few weeks later, Calder visited with Arya. We had dinner on the patio while the desert turned gold at sunset. He looked across the table and said quietly, "You don't have to hide anything from me anymore. Mom, I don't want your money. I just want you to live honestly." I smiled. "You're the only thing I never hid. Calder, everything I did was to keep you whole." We sat in silence, watching the sky turn crimson and fade into deep violet. There were no more negotiations, no more strategies, just the kind of stillness that comes after surviving a storm. In that piece, I finally understood power isn't about what you own, but about choosing how the story ends. They once called me a fat pig. I never corrected them, because even the smallest creature, if it waits long enough, knows that survival isn't about being admired. It's about knowing when to stay silent and when to let silence speak for you.